For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I'm a full-time professional LSAT coach. I've been teaching the LSAT for over 10 years now. And my LSAT journey started back in 2005 when I was looking to go to law school. I went to an Ivy League undergrad and thought I was going to go to a top 14 law school. And I was in for a pretty rude awakening when I found my first practice test was a 152, which is right around the median LSAT score. So that, needless to say, that was not particularly encouraging. And I was in for many more rude awakenings when my LSAT scores stayed in the low 150s for a long time. And it took me over an entire year before I was able to very gradually bring my score up to a 175 on test day. And once I did, I started helping out friends, teaching them LSAT stuff. I had taught other standardized tests in the past, like the SAT and the ACT, so I started teaching the LSAT as well. And since the LSAT is more niche and it's also more interesting, that quickly became my entire focus. I stopped teaching any other exam and devoted myself exclusively to the LSAT. Then a few years later, I actually started a website devoted to LSAT prep, and that website is called the LSAT blog. Some of you may have already checked that out. And if you haven't, then I strongly encourage you to do so. So this is my LSAT website. This is the About Me page. You can see what I used to look like back when I did not have glasses or a beard. And so that's younger, prettier me. As you can see, that photo is not true to life. I need to update my photos. But anyway, that's me. That's my story there. And I have a few other resources too that I've been putting together. So the LSAT blog is the culmination of all my written material. I've written over 1,000 articles there on every single aspect of LSAT preparation. You can find it at lsatblog.blogspot.com. You can see the link right up there. More recently, I've been doing a few other things as well. I have the LSAT Unplugged LSAT Unplugged podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. And as you can see, I'm releasing new episodes pretty much every single day, sometimes even twice a day if I'm not able to restrain myself. I kind of am weirdly obsessed with this exam to the point that I just can't stop talking about it, as you can see, which is what I'm doing right now. So that's pretty much, that's a link to the podcast if you want to check that out. And as I mentioned, I also have a YouTube channel where I'm also releasing tons of LSAT information. I'll show you what that looks like too if you want to take a look. That's a lot of fun. Also, I'm doing all sorts of discussions and interviews. It's at youtube.com/LSAT blog. You can see I have playlists for games, reasoning, reading comp, test day prep. I have some in-person classes in NYC where I'm based. I have some discussions with many people, including a former NYU law admissions dean, former LSAT question writer, some LSAT coaching sessions I've done with students. You can see what it's like for them to work with me. And I also have many live online classes like what you see right here. So lots of fun stuff going on there, but I'm going to stop talking about myself in just a moment and dive into what the agenda actually is for today. So I'm going to be talking about the changes with LSAC happening in 2019 as we move towards the digital LSAT, along with a few other policy changes they're doing that will affect you. I'm also going to talk about what the digital LSAT actually looks like. We'll walk through it together. I'll show you some of the features that they're offering. Finally, I'll talk about LSAT Logic Games, Logical Reasoning, not so much reading comp because nobody really cares about that quite as much. But if you have questions, of course, ask me. I'll also talk about LSAT test day prep, and then I'll open it up to a general Q&A on anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. You can ask me anything you like. I think about this stuff all the time, and I talk about it all the time too. So if you have a question, I probably know the answer, and if not, I'll just tell you, hey, I don't know, and I'll get back to you on that. But anyway, I guess the biggest thing happening this year, of course, is that the LSAT is going digital in 2019, starting with the June LSAT, which will be paper and pencil, but the writing sample will be digital. So you'll have your 5 LSAT sections on test day, June 3rd, but the writing sample, you won't do it at the test center. You'll do it later from home on your own computer. They'll monitor you with a webcam and a microphone, kind of like I'm being monitored right now, actually. And they're doing that for test security purposes, and you're typing it out on the computer. And so for that reason, your writing will probably be a bit more legible than it typically would have been doing it by hand after doing 5 LSAT sections. So maybe admission officers will take it slightly more seriously than they used to. The extent to which they will, it remains to be seen because the writing sample is not scored. I still wouldn't ever worry too much about it, but just know that maybe there's a slight chance that they'll look at it more than they otherwise would. So take it seriously, put in your best effort, and maybe think a little bit about spell check and typos. Typically, you could probably finish the writing sample in 20, 25 minutes. Then you'll have the remaining 10 to 15 minutes to double check and triple check everything. And because you're typing, maybe you'll go even faster than you otherwise might. So just keep that in mind, that you will have time to go back, take it seriously. Otherwise, nothing is different on the June LSAT, which is coming up in just over a month and a half, really. Then the July LSAT is when the real transition starts. And it's kind of weird. Half of test takers will get the digital format, which is going to be on a tablet. The other half of test takers will get the paper and pencil format, as it always has been. LSAC will choose for you, and you will not get any advance notice. So be ready for that if you're going for July. And one nice thing about July is that you get to see your score before you decide whether to cancel, which may remove some of the stress and anxiety around what your score might be. Now, I don't really ever recommend canceling. There's not much reason to, because law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. Let me repeat that. Law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only consider the highest. And so for that reason, there's really never a reason to cancel unless you know for a fact that something went terribly wrong. Like you misbubbled the entire thing in a way that LSAC would never correct, or you had a total nervous breakdown and skipped doing an entire section, or you threw up and that totally threw you off completely. But if you just have a vague sense that things went a little bit less well than they otherwise might have, or than they typically would, and maybe one game or one passage didn't go that great, that is not necessarily a reason to cancel. Even if you're certain that you got, let's say, below a 160 and you would only apply to law school with a 160 plus, you might still want to keep the score, because otherwise you're going to have a cancellation on your record. And a cancellation is a lot more ambiguous than any score is. Even if you wouldn't love to show AdComs a 157 and you feel like that's what you got, the cancellation is a big question mark. For all they know, you got a 140 and you might not want to apply with the 140. And so if a cancellation might be viewed the same way, then you're better off keeping the score. And I can't say how a cancellation will be viewed. So much better to take the LSAT multiple times and have those scores on record than to cancel. The alternative is, if you feel like you're not going to be ready before walking in, you could withdraw your registration, and law schools will never know that you were even registered. You could postpone your registration if you do so by the deadline, which is typically 2 to 3 weeks out. If you postpone by the deadline, they'll only keep some of your money and they'll give you a partial refund. If you withdraw your registration, let's say the week before, then they will keep all your money, but better that than having a cancellation on your record. And for the July LSAT, like I said, you can see your score before canceling. And if you cancel, they'll give you a free LSAT registration for a future test date. So that could save you nearly $200, but I still would not really consider that, because it's a drop in the bucket compared to law school expenses, to tuition, to opportunity costs. And so for that reason, try not to be penny wise and pound foolish. Do what's best for you regardless of the fees. Now, one person's asking, does it look bad if you take the LSAT multiple times? No, it does not. In fact, they expect it now more than ever, because they are not averaging multiple scores. So let's say that you deserve a 160, like all your practice test averages are around a 160. That's your aptitude and that's where you're at. That's awesome. A 160 is a good score, but maybe you want a top 14 school where you need a 165 or above, depending on your GPA. Now, you get a 160 and you think, well, that's not really what I wanted. I could retake. And yes, you could retake. And in fact, you could change absolutely nothing at all in your understanding of the LSAT, but still score 3 to 4 points better, because there is a margin of error, or a score band of 3.5 points on either end, meaning that one day you could get a 160, the next day a 157 or even a 156, the following day a 163 or a 164. Now, a 164 is going to open a lot more doors for you than a 160 would, and of course, even more than a 157 would. But by nothing more than chance or luck or randomness, you could get 3 to 4 points better. So it's to your advantage to retake just through blind luck alone. Of course, maybe you don't deserve the 163 or 164, but you have that number on record. That's what you apply with. Law schools only take the highest. So somebody who gets a 160, then a 157, then a 164, they're applying as if they'd gotten a 164. Now, is it better to only take it once and get a 164? Yes, of course. But that's not reality. It is what it is. It might take a few tries before you reach the higher end of your score band. And all you might have to do is take the LSAT one more time. And with the LSAT being offered more frequently than ever before, it is to your advantage to retake. And this is another one of those policy changes that's happening where the LSAT is going from being offered 4 times a year, as it has been for my entire career, to now being offered 9 or 10 times a year. So far this year, the LSAT was offered in January and March. It will be offered again in June and July. Then it will be offered again in September, October, and November. And for those who are counting, I think that was 7 times. But next year, starting 2020, it'll be offered even more. It'll be offered nearly every month. So for those of you thinking of taking the LSAT either this summer or this fall, you have 2 major options I would consider, and then you could do even more than that. You could take the LSAT in both June and July. So if you're planning on June, I would strongly recommend doing July also, because they're only 5 or 6 weeks apart, meaning that all you've got to do to stay fresh is to take maybe 1 timed exam a week for a 5 to 6 week period, and then take the LSAT first June 3rd, then July 15th. You stay fresh, you do 3 to 4 points better, awesome, you apply with that higher score. If you say the same or do worse, no big deal. They'll still take you with the highest score. Then if you're thinking of taking the LSAT in the fall instead, then you've got September, October, and November, all of them just about a month apart from each other. So in that case, you've only got to stay fresh for another 4 weeks. Previously, people used to have to wait 2 to 3 months to retake. Now it's only 1 month in between those test dates. So it's really easier than ever. So it definitely does not look bad to take it multiple times. Previously, I would typically see folks taking it 2, 3, 4 times. Now I'm seeing people take it anywhere from 3 to 6 times. Totally normal, totally okay. Law schools don't care. The reason they don't care is because the US News rankings only take into account the highest score of matriculating students. This is a policy change that happened back in 2006. Prior to 2006, law schools averaged multiple scores because they had to give the average score of matriculating students to the American Bar Association, who then gives it to US News, and everyone cares about the US News rankings for some reason, even though nobody really reads them for anything else. But went from being the average score to now the highest score starting in 2006. Now, a lot of law schools will say they consider multiple scores because they want to give the appearance of holistic review. Maybe it sounds more exclusive, maybe it sounds nicer, but you have to look at their incentives. I don't know why they're lying. I think part of it's a combination of failing to update their websites and then wanting to look like they're doing the more accurate thing, which is maybe averaging scores from like a scientific perspective, but from a practical real world perspective, they are taking the highest. Everyone in the know says that. I talk to admissions people, this is what they tell me. Some other changes happening. Let's see, for the digital LSAT, someone was asking about scrap paper. Great question. So this is a logistical thing that where previously the paper and pencil LSAT, you do not get any scrap paper. So if you're taking the LSAT in June, no scrap paper. You're taking it in July and you get the paper and pencil format, no scrap paper. But if you are taking the digital format, yes, you will get scrap paper, virtually unlimited. So it is no longer a concern to have a space constraint. Now I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what it used to look like. So for the game section, I believe it was, when was it? It was June 2012, PrepTest 66. Prior to that time, logic games were laid out across only one page. And so it looked something like this. I've cut out the question text for copyright concerns, but this is pretty much what the paper LSAT used to look like for every exam from PrepTest number 1 in June 1991 through December 2011, PrepTest 65. Now, since then, there has been a change. Now, you get a 2-page layout for logic games. So now, PrepTest 66, June 2012, all the way to present with PrepTest 86, which is the November 2018 LSAT, you get this nice 2-page layout, which is obviously preferable because now you have all that space below the questions. Like here's the initial paragraph and the rules. Then you have the questions associated. You could use all this space below on the page, which worked out to roughly maybe a page and a quarter of 8.5 by 11 paper. So that's pretty good. Now, starting with the digital LSAT, it's going to be a little bit different. So here I'm going to show you what the digital LSAT looks like. This is on LSAC's website, familiar.lsac.org. You can play around with one of the digital LSATs. This is PrepTest 73, and they have some cool functionalities here. You could see they have a countdown timer. You could see that they let you increase the text size if you want to, and you can increase the brightness. Now, this doesn't work on the desktop, but it does on mobile and tablet. So yes, the digital LSAT will be on a tablet, a Microsoft Surface Go specifically. And so this is the layout of a particular logic game. As you can see here, there is very little space below that, but that's totally fine because you're not doing work on the tablet. You're doing your work separately on scrap paper. And like I said, you have virtually unlimited scrap paper. So here is a digital LSAT logic game. You could see there's only one question per screen. So you have to flip ahead to the future questions and kind of go back and forth. And you can see this little black mark here telling you which question you're on. And you can click around it at a moment's notice from one to the other very seamlessly. There are some cool interactive features here. You can underline, as you can see here. You can highlight, as you can see. You can even erase what you highlighted, erase what you underlined. You can highlight in different colors. These are all cool features, and I wouldn't really bother with any of them. I think they're a huge waste of time and not going to really serve you in any way. I wouldn't bother with these. I would do your work on the side because the biggest issue is that you cannot draw freehand on the tablet the way that you could on a piece of paper. And like they give you a stylus, but I don't know what good it is really because all it lets you do is select these different functions. You can't draw freehand on it the way that you would on a piece of paper or the way that you would, let's say, on a whiteboard. So let's say if I were using a whiteboard on a tablet, for example, I could do something like this and draw whatever I wanted, like maybe make 5 slots for 5 different letters if I'm doing, like, let's say, an ordering game. But you can't do that on the digital LSAT. I don't know why not, but it is what it is. We have to deal with it. So consider the limitations that you have before you and use the scrap paper that they're giving you. And of course, practice like it's game day. I suggest getting a tablet. I hate to say that because it's a couple $100, of course, but it's well worth it. If it gets you even a single point more on the LSAT to have that increased familiarity with the tablet, it's worth it. Now, LSAT is using a Microsoft Surface Go. You don't have to use that though. You could use a Samsung Galaxy if you want. You could use an iPad if you want. Just get a stylus in particular. I think you can get one on Amazon for like $10 or even less. It's well worth practicing like it's game day. If you can't get a tablet or you want alternatives, you could get the PDFs depending on how you access them. You could then put the PDFs on a tablet, use a stylus, and use the annotation feature in Preview for Mac or some other program, and that could be a useful way to get used to the format. Now, it's not all bad, though. There are a couple of good things. I think the countdown timer is somewhat useful. I think the text enlarging is somewhat useful if, let's say, you have eyesight issues or you just feel more comfortable with it. You can also increase the line spacing if you want, which might be useful for logical reasoning or reading comp, depending on what works best for you. Now, there are some questions here. I'm going to see if any of those are related once again. Bubbling. So bubbling in at the bottom, we've got, let's say I bubbled in A, then it shows up on the bottom left. Let's say I want to eliminate choice B. It crosses off there automatically. And then if I go to question 6, I bubble that in. And let's say choice C, it bubbles in there. I can jump to 4, bubble that in. So you could do things in any order very easily and see at a glance what you've done, what you haven't. You can also flag a question. So if let's say I wanted to flag number 7, that shows up as being flagged if I want to come back to it later. So you could bubble throughout. That is a nice time-saving feature. I think the flagging is also a benefit too, to quickly see at a glance what you've done, what you haven't. So that is a plus of the digital format. So just keep that in mind. You could bubble throughout. Maybe that saves you 30 seconds or a minute or two. And that's extraordinarily useful. Now, somebody asked, why can't we use a regular Mac computer? It's because LSAC has chosen to only administer the digital LSAT on a tablet. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's easier to transport them and lock them up securely in between test administrations. That's just my guess, though. I have no clue, honestly. But you could practice the digital LSAT on any device, really. I've been on a computer here, so you can see that you can do it on the computer and use most of the functionalities if you want to practice on your computer. But otherwise, it's good to do it on a phone if you have a phone with a large screen like a Google Pixel, or you could do it on any tablet like a Microsoft Surface Go, Samsung Galaxy, iPad, etc. So the Digital LSAT Familiarization tool at familiar.lsat.org has that functionality to work on all different devices. And I know a lot of prep companies are also putting LSATs in the digital format to be usable on any device. So far, the only software I know of is at LSAC's site, again, familiar.lsac.org. I do think some prep companies are going to offer more resources for it, and LSAC as well will be coming out more in the future. Someone asked about internet access. Yes, you will need internet access. I don't know of anyone offering these for download or offline use, so you do need to be connected to Wi-Fi or data of some sort. Someone else asked, when we take the LSAT on a tablet, do we get the score immediately? That would be nice, wouldn't it? And it would make sense for them to offer that. But LSAC is super precise about everything. They do everything very carefully. And so for that reason, whether it's administered on paper or digital, they're taking about 3 weeks to get back to you with your score. Even though it's digital, even in the fall, when it's fully digital, they'll still be taking about 3 weeks. And the reason it takes so long is because they want to do some detailed statistical analysis to see if the questions performed the way they expected them to. So you know that you're taking 4 scored sections plus the experimental section. Now, the experimental is used for future test administrations. They want to see how difficult each question is and how a 170 plus score does on each question, how a 160 score does on each, and so on. And so they do all that testing beforehand, but even after they administer it as a scored question, they still want to check it against their expectations. And so they take a long time to do that analysis. And so even though it'll be digital, and even though theoretically it's like a Scantron, they should be able to input it and give you your score immediately, like they do for the GRE or the GMAT, they're still taking a while to get back to. And even for the July LSAT specifically, they're not even giving us a score release date right now. So it could take even longer than 3 weeks to get your score back for that one. Keep that in mind. You will have to wait a bit longer if you're doing July. And if you're doing September, it'll be the same as always, I expect. But no big deal, because applying to law school early matters much less than it used to, since there's been a recent decline in the number of applicants to law school. And so law schools are waiting around longer and longer to see who else comes along. They're waitlisting people. They're deferring people more than ever before. I recently spoke with a student who got waitlisted from Harvard, and it's April, and they just waitlisted him after deferring, and he doesn't know what he's doing this fall. He's still got 4.5 months till law school starts, and he doesn't know where he's going yet. And many other schools are doing the exact same thing. So keep in mind that applying early really is not a big deal. They're probably going to waitlist or defer you anyway, unless your numbers are significantly above their medians. Now, one question I got is about the writing sample for June and beyond. So if you are taking in the June or beyond, you're doing the writing sample digitally on LSAC's website. You have up to 1 year to complete it after you take the LSAT. Now, if you've already taken the LSAT before and you've done a writing sample, you don't have to do it again. Now, if you want to do it again, they'll charge you $15 and you could do it on the digital style, but I don't know why you would bother to do that, since it's not scored and there's no reason to give them your money just to let them host your writing sample digitally on their site for some reason. But if you want to, by all means, you're certainly welcome to. But otherwise, I wouldn't think too much about it, honestly. Just stick with the scored stuff that really matters. Now, I want to talk a bit about logic games in particular. I've gone through some of the digital LSAT versus paper format stuff with the layout for scrap paper. One other thing I want to show you, though, is actually how I might deal with the scrap paper issue. So let's say if I'm going to do it on the side, this is what my layout might look like. I actually hand wrote this and took a photo of it to show you. If I had scrap paper, I might write the rules on the upper left. I might put my main diagram or main diagrams on the upper right, then lay out my questions for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the diagrams for each of those in some sort of clean, organized fashion, and do it consistently every single time. Because you don't want to try out something new on test day, and you don't want to be chaotic or haphazard with what you're doing. So for that reason, I would draw it the same way every time. And this is like if I were doing an ordering game with 5 slots, that's how I might lay it out. Now, you notice I'm actually drawing A, B, C, D, E for each question. That's because I think there's something powerful about physically crossing it off and having everything in one place. Now, you know, of course, that on the digital LSAT, like I showed you, you can cross it off by clicking or tapping with the stylus on their site. But I still think there's some sort of efficiency gain to actually having it all in one place and seeing at a glance what's going on. And then, of course, also having your previous work to come back to later. So for that reason, this is how I might lay it out for every single game I do when drawing on scrap paper. So if you're using the PDFs, you could have your work on the screen. You have your questions there, but the diagrams you do all on the side with virtually unlimited scrap paper like you're seeing here. So I hope that answers some questions about what you might want to do with that. Someone's asking about, I'm just going to read the question here because it's kind of long. If I'm not going to be prepared for the LSAT in July, is it worth giving the LSAT in July instead of September just to get the possible experience of the digital LSAT? I'm worried I might get a 150 or lower in test conditions for the first time because of stress-related issues. Is it smarter to get over my fear by giving the LSAT early? Great question. So should you take the LSAT as a dry run in July so that you're not taking it for real in September digitally when it really matters? And my answer is honestly no. If you're not going to be ready in July, don't bother taking it then, because you're virtually guaranteed to get a score you're not going to be happy with. Now, the other thing in addition is that the July LSAT, you have a 50-50 shot of getting paper versus digital. So there's actually very little potential benefit to doing the July LSAT if, first off, you might get paper anyway and get the last possible paper administration and then still do digital for the first time in the fall. And again, because law schools don't average multiple scores and they don't really care if you're retaking, then I don't see a benefit to doing it before you're ready in July. Just take it in September. If you're not ready in September, that's fine. Take it in October, and then September will have been your dry run with the digital format, and you can just scrap that score, meaning it's on your record, but you don't care about it or focus on it. You have a month more to prep for October, and then it won't be your first time having done it digitally, and you have a better score on record. Now, in terms of overcoming things like stress and anxiety, that is a big topic, and there are two parts to it. I think one of them is doing things related to mindfulness and focus training to avoid getting bogged down, avoid getting stuck in the moment. Yoga is really useful too. Then on the flip side, properly simulating test day conditions is extraordinarily useful. A lot of prep companies offer free LSAT diagnostic tests in part as marketing, in part to scare you into seeing how hard the LSAT is when you've done no studying at all. But the benefit to you is that you're getting it in a proctored setting. And I expect that with the LSAT going digital, they're going to start giving free LSAT diagnostics in the digital format. And so if you're in a major city or even in the suburbs, you probably have access to some big prep company offering these digital LSATs. And I would strongly recommend doing some of them. I think I have a link here I can give you about test day prep. And this is a YouTube playlist I'll share in the chat here, where I actually give you tons of prep on every single aspect of getting ready for test day in terms of simulating test day conditions and overcoming stress and anxiety. So check out that YouTube playlist. I also have podcast episodes about this as well that could help you out and give you some guidance. Let's see what else. Oh, by the way, I also am live streaming this on Facebook as well. And so for any of you who are enjoying this and want more lessons like this, more online classes like this, I have a Facebook group where I'm giving live streams like this all the time, virtually every week, multiple times a week. I'm having discussions with other folks. And so I'll be doing more as the June, July LSATs get closer. I'll be doing more test day prep classes. So join the Facebook group. It's at facebook.com/groups/LSAT Unplugged. If you want to get more classes like this, I'm putting them there in addition to YouTube. Let's see what else. Now, if you're thinking about retaking, I know that retaking is a very common thing these days, more often than ever before. And so what you want to think about if you're going for a retake is what you can do differently the next time around. A lot of folks will register for the next LSAT test date, but then get busy with work or with school, and then the studying never happens. Before they know it, it's test day. They walk in and do no better than they had done previously. And so I've spent a lot of time creating resources around LSAT retakes, and I have taught another online class recently focused on retaking, which I call 15 LSAT retake strategies in 15 minutes. And I put the YouTube link in the chat there for those of you who might be interested in that and want to check that out. Now, if you're going for the June or July LSATs, you have about 2 to 3 months remaining. Like I said, I recommend taking both because it's only a 5 to 6 week gap in between them. And I thought it might be useful to give you some advice on structuring your study plans. LSAT study plans should typically involve 3 phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is untimed work focused on building the foundation. So you do that by doing questions by type, but not necessarily just in the order given. So let's say you're doing games, reasoning, reading comp. I say start with games, start with the ordering games, and specifically the easiest ordering games. You do the easiest ordering games, followed by moderate difficulty ordering games, then the toughest ordering games. Then you do easy grouping games, moderate difficulty grouping games, and then the hardest grouping games, and so on to combination games, rare games, pattern games, and so on. Now, then you do logical reasoning by type, inference questions, strengthen, weaken, necessary assumption, flaw, and so on. You do them by type, also from easy to difficult within each category. Now, I've devoted a lot of time to thinking about how to structure your LSAT studying when you're going it alone, not taking a class, self-studying, because my goal is really to offer free and low-cost LSAT resources so that you don't have to take a $1,000 prep class. So I've laid out LSAT schedules on my website, and I'll put that link in the chat as well. I have free week-by-week plans and then premium day-by-day study plans, and covering all different study timelines from 1 month through 7 months. And so for those of you who aren't able to see the chat for some reason, I'm going to show you that page on my site, because I think one of the most important things when you're studying is having a plan of attack. So this is that page on my site, study schedules. I have some testimonials here, student feedback on them. And then I have 1 month through 7 months, all different periods of time. I also have some articles on how to fit in time while you're working, while you're in college, and how to fit time into your day as well. So if you're going for June or July, I'd suggest one of these two, the 2 month or 3 month plan. But honestly, I recommend giving it more time. So I hope that if you're going for the June or July LSATs, you're not starting from scratch. I hope that you're giving yourself more like 5 to 6 months. And 5 to 6 months is honestly, it's worth it. You know, you earned your undergraduate GPA over the course of 3, 4, or even 5 years or longer. And that weighs less heavily than your LSAT score does. The LSAT is more important than the GPA, yet people only want to give it 2 to 3 months of studying. I don't get it, honestly. I know that maybe the SAT only took you that long to master or reach your fullest potential, but for the LSAT, it's much more like learning a foreign language. There is nothing you've done quite like it in school beforehand or in college at all. The LSAT's a totally different beast. It tests your reasoning ability. It tests your ability to think critically, think skeptically, and also tests your short-term working memory, and that takes time. So I'd say it typically takes people 5 to 6 months to reach their fullest potential. I know I said it took me a year. I'm not saying it'll take you that long. My goal is to make it as efficient and smooth as possible, but still 5 to 6 months is not too long to devote to this given its importance. And like I said, retaking is worth it also, because even just getting a point or two more could lead to getting thousands more in scholarship money or getting into a better law school. I saw one study indicating that 1 point on the LSAT is worth $4,000 to you now. So if you look at that difference, how that appreciates in value over the course of your entire career, especially if you're in your 20s, the ROI on that is huge. It's well worth investing the time. I see one person here saying, would you recommend going into the LSAT without much previous knowledge or studying, like you might for the SAT, just to see what your base abilities are and see where you're starting off, see what your aptitude is? I wouldn't do that, honestly. I don't think it's worth taking the LSAT in an official administration just to see how you'll do. Because I'll tell you honestly, unless you're a natural born genius, you're not going to do well. You're not going to do well. Most people don't do well on their first timed exam, and there's no reason to have a take on your record when you know it's not going to be good. Now, if you want to get a sense of where you're at, 2 options. You could get an LSAT exam and do it on your own. There's the free June 2007 LSAT PDF on LSAC's website. Just Google it, or go to LSAC's digital familiarization tool, and you could do it in the digital interactive format if you want. But chances are you're not going to do well, especially LSAT Logic Games. They are excruciatingly difficult, especially for those who aren't natural born math geniuses or anything like that. And so I would say, don't take it just to see how you'll do. Don't have that take on your record for no reason, especially if you might want to retake a few times. Again, like I said, taking it 3, 4, 5, 6 times is not too many, but I work with a lot of folks who are coming to me and it's their 4th take. They've done maybe first they tried studying on their own, then they took a $1,000 prep class, then they took another $1,000 prep class and still didn't click. Then they think, you know what, I want to self-study, but I want to have a plan, or maybe I want to have one-on-one help. And so they take it a couple of times, but don't put yet one more take on your record if you know it's not going to go well. So I honestly wouldn't bother with anything like that. I know that may not be what you want to hear, but you could also go to one of those big prep companies and take one of their free diagnostics for marketing purposes. Don't fall for their sales pitch, but still get the benefit of the proctored setting and see how you do there. You don't need to pay $200 or more to do it and then have that take on your record. I could talk about some more stuff related to test day prep, and maybe I'll get to that in a bit, but I saw a couple of other questions in the chat and the Q&A portion I want to address. So yeah, so someone's asking about the 2-month study timeline. I got sidetracked here for a minute. So I say accuracy first, focus on building your foundation. You do questions by type, untimed. Then you move on to pacing with individual timed sections, because timing is another huge factor in your LSAT studying. You know, typically it's one thing to do it under untimed conditions and get perfect there. That's not easy, but you can do it. But then once you introduce timing, things might fall apart. And so I don't want you to run the risk of having a false sense of confidence doing it untimed, and then timing, of course, everything changes. So untimed first, focusing on building your foundation with accuracy, then timed individual paced sections, 35 minutes, deal with your games pacing, reasoning pacing, reading comprehension pacing. Then phase 3, the final phase, is endurance with full length 5-section exams. The released LSATs only give you 4 sections, but on test day, you'll be doing 5. So you want to take one section from another exam and splice it in as an experimental. So maybe you do tests, let's say you want to do test 83, 84, 85, and 86 as full-length timed exams. You could then take exam 82, divide it into 4 parts, and then insert each one of those 4 sections into exams 83, 84, 85, and 86. Then later, tally your results for what 82 might have been had you done it separately. But the 5-section endurance is extremely important to practice on. So I would say do each phase one by one. You start off with games, maybe mix in a little bit of reasoning and reading comp along the way. Then once you've built your games foundation, move on to focus on logical reasoning, but still stay fresh with games and reading comp. Then move on to reading comp, stay fresh on games and reasoning, and so on. Then once you've built the foundation in each part, you do your pacing with individual sections, but you also ID weak areas and focus on those weak areas. Then you also want to make sure that you're engaging in detailed review. A lot of times it's too easy to take exam after exam, measure your results, be happy or sad about how you did, then move on to the next timed exam. But that is a waste of material. The benefit of doing a timed exam is not simply to measure yourself, because what's the point of that? It wasn't the real thing anyway. The benefit of doing timed work is to ID your weak areas, see what problems you're getting wrong, see what problems you're having difficulty with, and then focusing on those. So maybe you do a timed exam, you get 15, 20 questions wrong, maybe you get a 165 or a 160. But there may have been another 10 questions you got right, but had difficulty with, or you were down to 2 and you guessed on them and got lucky. And those questions also are just as important to work on, because it very well could have gone the other way next time around. So you want to see, what tricks and traps were you falling for? Was it a trap of encouragement towards the wrong answer? Was it a trap of discouragement away from the right answer? Was it something in the stimulus or something in the question stem? You want to figure out exactly what was it about that question that gave you difficulty so that you can avoid it next time around. There are hundreds or thousands of tricks the LSAT test makers could possibly have for you on test day that they throw at you, and you're not necessarily falling for all of those, or else you'd be getting a 120, and presumably you're doing better than that. And if you aren't, that's okay too. But you want to figure out which specific tricks and traps you're falling for so that you won't make those same mistakes the next time around. And so one extremely useful thing to do is engage in detailed review of everything you got wrong and everything you had difficulty with. And you might even want to mark off anything that gives you trouble in the moment. Then before you score it, give it another shot under untimed conditions to see if the timing was the issue or if the accuracy was the issue. And no matter what, if you're getting it wrong at least once, whether timed or untimed, there is still something to be learned of that. So I recommend keeping some sort of mistake journal or mistake log of every question you've ever gotten wrong, and or had difficulty with too, and return to those again and again and again. Maybe you don't necessarily do them every week or every day, but you come back to them every couple weeks or every month, and you see if you're doing better next time around. So I hope that answered your question. I hope it was helpful. Happy to go into more depth. One other thing I think about is if you're studying for the July LSAT and you've got 2 months or 3 months remaining, you want to make sure that you're not burning out. So especially once the semester ends, let's say it ends in mid-May, and you've got another 2 months till the July LSAT, don't study every single day. Take days off. In my study schedules, I actually integrated days off into the plan so that you don't burn out. And also, if you're studying full-time, carve out time for rest. Maybe you wake up 6 or 7 or 8 a.m. even. You study from like 9 till 12, take a break for lunch for an hour, come back, study 1 to 4. That's a good 6 hours of studying. That's enough. You don't have to do any more than that. Any more than that could lead to burnout. Even 5 hours could be enough. I think that if you're doing it properly and not getting distracted by Facebook or your phone or whatever, 5 hours of hard studying is really more than enough, especially if you're studying full-time and you're not working, you're not in school anymore. On the other hand, if you're taking summer classes or you're working full-time, that's okay too. Carve out an hour before work, an hour during lunch, and then maybe 2 hours after work, a couple days a week. And then you're doing 10, 15 hours a week because you're also doing some work on the weekends. That alone's enough. If you are working, I recommend getting to work an hour early, finding a conference room at your office or finding a coffee shop nearby and studying there. Don't try to do it at home while you're still groggy before work. Don't try to do it once you get home when you're tired after work. Do it when you're still in your work clothes and you're still in like a work mindset. Because once you get home and you have dinner, there are too many other tempting distractions around that will derail you from actually getting the studying done. So those are some thoughts on study schedules. I see a few more questions in the chat I want to get to. I got one person asking, if you're ending your junior year now, when to start studying? Well, it depends on when you want to go to law school. If you want to apply to law school this fall, meaning that you're going to be entering senior year this fall and you want to go to law school directly, then I would suggest taking the LSAT this summer or this fall so that you can apply this fall. And like I said, applying early doesn't really matter that much. So even if you take it in November or January, you could still apply this cycle, but there is a benefit to applying earlier when there is more scholarship money still available. Now, on the flip side, if you don't want to go to law school directly from undergrad, then you can kind of take the LSAT whenever. You could work for a couple of years, save up money, make sure that law school is really what you want to do, and then take it whenever. LSAT scores are good for 5 years, so you could take the LSAT now or a year from now and still apply 3 years from now and be totally fine. I would suggest taking the LSAT sooner rather than later, though, so that you have time to retake if you need to. And while you're still in college and still in a study mindset, because once you start working, let's say you get married or you have kids or you just get busy with work a lot. I work with a lot of students who are paralegals and they have very busy work schedules with long hours and it's harder to fit in the time. But while you're still in college, maybe senior year, fall semester or spring semester, you could take a lighter course load and then treat the LSAT like a 6-credit class or more and carve out the time maybe every Friday or every weekend to put in a good 5-10 hours per week, or at least, if not more, to study for the LSAT. I got one question here asking, how many practice tests should you take before the LSAT? I would say ideally 10. Ideally take 10 full-length timed exams before test day. The reason I say that is that pacing is really important and endurance is really important also. So you don't want to only do foundational work and you don't want to only do individual sections. Now, there aren't that many more weeks than 10 till the July LSAT. I think at the moment there are only like 13, 14 weeks. So 10 timed exams at one a week would be almost every week from now till then. So you also want to make sure that you're building your foundation and not jumping straight into the timed exams. The timed exams are important, but there are also the accuracy and pacing portions of your study schedules to consider. So I hope that addressed that question. I see a few more here in the chat and Q&A that I want to get to. Got one question asking, let's see here. In logical reasoning, I find myself being able to do around 20 questions in 35 minutes. I'm able to do so with almost 100% accuracy most of the time. When I go faster, I get anxious and end up losing on accuracy. What's the best way to increase speed to be able to finish the section with time left? Great question. This speaks to pacing that I said. So you see this person here, he's only getting to 20 questions in 35 minutes when there are 25 or 26 LR questions per section. So there's 5 to 6 that he's not getting to. How do you make sure you get to those and still stay accurate? What you want to do is you want to speed through the easy questions so that you have more time for the more difficult questions that come later. Logical reasoning is unique in that the questions are in an average order of difficulty, meaning that the first 10 questions are easier than the last 10 questions. So you might, if you're aiming for 160 plus reasonably, you might aim to do the first 10 in 10 to 12 minutes, then build up a time bank to apply to the tougher questions later in the section. Typically questions 18 through 23 or 15 through 23 are among the hardest, meaning that they will take you longer than the average amount of time allotted per section. So for that reason, you need more time for them than the easier ones, and that's why the time bank is useful. You can even flag tough questions to come back to later. You saw I pulled up with the Digital LSAT, you could actually flag them on the tablet and see at a glance what you flagged to come back to later. If you're doing it on paper, that's okay too. Just mark it off with an asterisk and flip back later. What you don't want to do is get bogged down in the moment. It's too easy to get bogged down on tough questions, then never get to the end of the section. So if you find that you're stuck in logical reasoning quicksand and you're not making headway, that's okay. Just mark it off. Once you realize that you're not making headway and that it looks like it's total gibberish, skip it, hope to come back to it later. If you do, great. If not, well, that was a tough question you probably might have gotten wrong anyway. So it's worth getting to later questions that might actually be easier. It's kind of weird, but questions 24 and 25 are sometimes easier than the toughest ones in 15 through 23. So skip, come back to it later, just blast through the easy ones. If you have a strong foundation, then your intuitions on the easy ones in the first 10 are probably solid. So I hope that addressed your question. I see a few more here I'm going to address now. Someone's asking, how old can letters of recommendation be? How recent do they need to be? I'm honestly not sure about that. I think that more recent is typically better. I think that you don't want them to be 3 years old. I think at least no more than 1 or 2 years old is probably good. So maybe if someone wrote you a letter and it's old now, maybe ask them to rewrite it or reprint it and re-sign it just with a new date at the top. I'm sure they have it saved somewhere on their computer, so they can send you a new one. And then let's say you want to apply to law school a few years from now, but you want a letter from a professor. You could ask them now, or you could just try to keep in touch with them, ping them every now and then, send them an email every now and then, every 6 months, every year, not too often, just kind of reminding them that you exist. You could also ping them on social media or LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, just to kind of stay at the top of their mind. And then, of course, when you request a letter of rec, you could actually include a few bullet points on who you are, what was notable about you, like maybe what you had a term paper on, or what you talk about in class, or what class did you take, something like that. I hope that addresses that. Got one question. If I know I'm getting it wrong, should I leave it blank or guess? You should definitely guess, because there's no guessing penalty on the LSAT. So there's never a reason to leave anything blank. You want to bubble in every single question. Your odds of guessing blindly are 1 in 5, but that's still something. And then, of course, if you're eliminating a couple and you're down to 2 or 3, then your odds improve significantly. So it's definitely worth bubbling in every single one. On the Digital LSAT, they make it very clear when there's a 5-minute warning, 5 minutes remaining. And so at that mark, you might want to bubble if you haven't already. Then on the paper format, the proctor is supposed to give you a 5-minute warning. Of course, they're only human. They might not. So try to have your own sense of time. You can bring an analog watch to the paper LSAT. And so have that handy to do your own timing when you need to, so that you're bubbling things in before the last minute. You definitely don't want to fail to bubble when there's only a few minutes remaining. A few more questions here. Got one asking, should you start with the tough questions first in logical reasoning questions? Definitely not. Definitely not. People ask me that sometimes, but I don't really see a reason to do the toughest ones first when everything's worth the same. You don't want to do the tough ones and then never get to the easy ones. And there's also a certain morale ego boost from doing the easier ones first and building your confidence, getting warmed up, and getting some solid ones correct under your belt. So I would say always do the easier ones first. In logical reasoning, it can be as simple as doing them in the order given. Then I would save the tough ones for last. And if you're getting bogged down on a tough one, just skip it and come back to it later. You absolutely can. And if you don't, no big deal. At least that was a tough one you might have gotten wrong anyway. And you don't want to risk, like I said, never getting to the easy ones. Someone asked about logic games and the rules, saying, I took an LSAT prep class, still confused on the rules. Are there any books you recommend that can teach and describe the games in detail? That's a great question. I think that there are a ton of great LSAT books out there. You could just go on Amazon, search LSAT games. There are some top rated ones. I would suggest choosing one from a company that specializes in the LSAT exclusively, not one that does every exam under the sun. And I also would suggest making sure that you use a book that contains real LSAT questions. There are some books out there that use fake ones. The fake ones are not good. They contain mistakes or typos, and there's nothing more frustrating than getting it wrong, not because of anything on your end, but because the question writer was lazy or didn't double check things. And you'll see from Amazon reviews typically if the book has mistakes. So I'd say use a book that only uses real LSAT questions. And the best books of all are the actual LSAT exams published by LSAC. They are called LSAC PrepTests, and most of them are available in books of 10 for about $20 each on Amazon. And then there are many folks out there, myself included, who have LSAT explanations available for free or for low cost. I have Logic Games explanations on my site for virtually every LSAT prep test. I'm going to show you that on the YouTube channel. If you want to check those out, they're totally free. I'm not charging anything for them. And I've done them for the vast majority of games ever released. So if you go back to the YouTube channel, which is at youtube.com/LSAT blog, you'll find there I have the explanations for virtually every Logic game. I'll put the link in the chat for you here. So you go to the YouTube channel, you scroll down, then I have free Logic Games explanations. You can see there, I've got them for virtually every LSAT, Juno 7, the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, and 30s, and so on. So I've covered most of them there. You can see, like, say for exams in the 70s, let's go there. You can see I've got for 70 game 1, 70 game 2, and so on, all the way down the line. And I'm a little bit behind on them because I've been working on other stuff, but I'll get to the other ones too eventually. Then let's see what else. I've also got, it's going to start playing, right? So, okay. Yeah, I'm hearing myself talking there. That's not good. All right. So let's say we go back to the website. I've got some explanations as well on there. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. Yeah. So on the website, I've got the day-by-day study plans I showed you. I've got cheat sheets, guides, checklists, vocabulary builder, written explanations. So you can see I've got written explanations for virtually every exam. And you see that LSAC was too lazy to write them. Unfortunately, that's too bad. They only give you the answer key. So I laid out explanations for virtually every one. You could see games, reasoning, reading comp, all the way from exam 19 through 77. Still have some catch up to do because they keep releasing 3 per year. And I even have samples of them as well you could check out. So I really try to be comprehensive. I mentioned I also have courses. I have course packages, video courses. I have for test day success, mindset, personal statement, games, reasoning, and reading comp. Then also some of the written materials too. I'm also teaching a live online LSAT masterclass. I've got one leading up to the June LSAT every week on Monday nights. I'll also be, but obviously this one's already started a bit, but depending on what your situation is, maybe I'll let people jump in the middle. I haven't decided yet. But I'm also going to offer a new LSAT class going forward for the July LSAT and the LSATs in the fall. I'm going to be covering recent LSAT exams, so be on the lookout for that. If you want to stay up to date on what I'm doing, a couple of things. You can email me at lsatunplugged@gmail.com. You can hit up the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/LSAT And what else? The YouTube channel, the podcast. I'll be posting more free LSAT classes on those mediums, so check those out too. And go to my website. You probably saw the pop-up thing at one point where you get a free LSAT cheat sheet. Go on there, get the free LSAT cheat sheet. We've been going for about an hour, I know, and some of you probably have to go. But anyway, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes more if you have any other questions at all on anything at all, LSAT or law school admissions. If I missed any of your questions, I apologize. I'm happy to address those now if you like. But I'll also be doing more free LSAT classes in the future. So join the Facebook group and email me and check out the YouTube channel and the podcast if you want more. I'm putting out more free stuff all the time, and I'm happy to address your questions and kind of take your advice and your ideas on what to cover in future LSAT live classes and LSAT recorded stuff too. Before I go, I see there was one question I did not get to, and I appreciate this person bearing with me and asking their question again. Someone asked, have you heard of internship or educational programs such as Lex Fellowship, and would you recommend participating in them? I actually don't know the Lex Fellowship specifically. Let me Google it right now and see what that's about. But internships, they're nice. If they interest you, honestly, then just go ahead and do them. But these things are not going to make a huge difference in your law school admission chances. This looks like one of those programs where you pay thousands of dollars and you get something on your resume. That honestly doesn't seem like a good use of your time or money to me. I think that you're much better off spending your time on any old internship that you find to be of value. That's really, I think, where you should focus. Law school admissions is really about the numbers. It's about your LSAT score and your GPA. Nothing else really matters that much. Maybe it's something like 50% LSAT, 30% GPA, 20% other stuff like personal statement, letters of rec, resume, and so on. So I wouldn't recommend paying money for any sort of law program or law fellowship or law internship. I think if anything, do a legal internship where they pay you. So work as a paralegal part-time or work as a paralegal after you graduate college, get some income going into your pocket, get some work experience. If you want to intern at a nonprofit and they're not paying you, that's your choice, of course. Maybe see if they can give you a stipend at least. But law schools, honestly, they know that there's no substitute for real legal experience as a lawyer. Even being a paralegal, while it gives you some exposure to the law, it's not nearly as good as actually being a lawyer. So I think do what you love, do what interests you, and save your time for what really matters, which is honestly getting the highest GPA possible and getting the best LSAT score possible. So I hope that answered your question. One final question, and then I'll let everyone go. What's the average cost for law school? Law schools, when you're paying sticker price, it could be as high as $50,000 per year, which is crazy high, of course, right? And a high-ranked law school doesn't, let me put it this way. A lower-ranked law school doesn't necessarily cost any less than a higher-ranked law school. Like NYU and a school ranked in the 50s could charge the exact same amount, but obviously the NYU degree is much more valuable than the lower-ranked law school's degree, yet they charge the same. And so you want to make sure that if you're going to a low-ranked law school, at least you're getting big scholarship money. And a little known fact is that most people do not pay sticker price for law school. Some folks are shy to negotiate scholarships, but that's not in your best interest. You want to negotiate, you want to apply to tons of schools, 10 or more, so that you can kind of play them off each other. If one offers you money, you could go take that offer to the other school and say, hey, so-and-so offered me X, can you match or exceed that because I'd rather go to your school? And then if they know that you have the other offer in hand, they might be willing to work with you a bit more. And then, of course, the other negotiating power you have is if your LSAT or GPA is above the median for the law school that you're applying to. So if it is, then that gives you bargaining power. The way to do that is, of course, to get a better LSAT score or GPA. And so that's why, like I said, it's worth retaking if you can. So anyway, folks, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you all for coming on a Friday. I appreciate you taking the time, investing yourselves in this process. I gave you a lot of links in the chat there. Please check them out and let me know any ideas you have, any questions you have. Feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best with your prep and take care. Have a great weekend, all.